I can see it started. I have 7 people on so far.
Okay, great.
Okay, so the video is almost done, and we're probably less than a minute from starting. Stand by.
Okay. Kanetta, do you want to type in the comments starting in a minute? I don't know if I can or not.
Yes, we'll do.
Kanetta, is your mic muted on Facebook Live? They can hear us.
Hello and welcome. On behalf of Emancipation Park Conservancy, thank you for joining us and supporting us during our Emancipation Park's 149th Annual Juneteenth Celebration presented by Shell. I am Lucy Bremond, Executive Director of Emancipation Park Conservancy. Before we begin the webinar, I would like to share some information with you about the historic Emancipation Park, the Conservancy, and our We Are Juneteenth campaign. Emancipation Park was founded in 1872 by formerly enslaved African Americans led by Reverend Jack Yates, Richard Allen, Richard Brock, and Reverend Divell. These men, along with members of the 3rd and 4th Ward communities, gathered $800 to purchase 10 acres of land and to celebrate their freedom, which was June 19, 1865, 2 years after President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. In 2013, the park underwent a $33.6 million renovation and later reopened in June 2017. Several public-private partnerships and the community work to revitalize the green space and to allow more economic and sustainable opportunities. Emancipation Park Conservancy is a nonprofit 501(c) charitable corporation, and it was established in 2014 to restore, manage, and enhance Emancipation Park. Its purpose was to create an open space of environmental community excellence while continuing to preserve the park's integrity and historical roots. Its goal is to transform the historic Emancipation Park into one of the nation's premier landmarks, international destination through capital initiatives, operational improvements, strategic partnerships, programming, and special events. Emancipation Park Conservancy's We Are Juneteenth is a national campaign that celebrates Juneteenth and its connections to the African American experience, including history, tradition, heritage, and culture. We Are Juneteenth is a digital platform that provides an opportunity to communicate, share, acknowledge, and recognize the significant contributions African Americans have made to help shape American culture and society. The campaign is a collaborative movement that highlights the strides and impact African Americans are making toward their own economical, educational, and political advancement. You know, last year, We Are Juneteenth was a virtual experience, and it reached over 250,000 people globally, with more than 25,000 people engaging in the Conservancy's content digitally. We are sure this year will be just as successful, and we cannot wait to celebrate 150 years of Emancipation Park with you in person next year. We have a great lineup of activities scheduled for the community to celebrate Juneteenth all month long. So make sure you visit our website at www.epconservancy.org or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at EP Conservancy for more information. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter. Happy Juneteenth, and we hope you enjoy the webinar. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Travis Torrance, and I'm the Global Litigation, Bankruptcy, and Credit Team Lead at Shell Oil Company. Welcome to Powering Progress Together. I'm excited to be the moderator for today's program. But listen, I know what you're thinking. A, I didn't sign up to listen to a boring lawyer, and B, I definitely didn't sign up to listen to a bankruptcy attorney. I promise you, you don't want to miss out on the discussion that we're about to have, because I've got two of the most dynamic and innovative leaders in all of Shell. But before we dive in, this past April, Mayor Sylvester Turner of Houston named an amazing performance poet, a writer, a mentor, and an entertainer by the name of Unspoken Dean as the city's 5th poet laureate. It's my honor to introduce him to kick things off with one of his original pieces entitled This Side Up.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here, but I won't belabor you anymore. My name is Unspoken Dean. Let's get into it. So it's Juneteenth, right? It's Juneteenth, and what comes to mind, other than barbecues, but it's also, y'all, about the Emancipation Proclamation, and it took 2 years to get word for everyone that they've been free. And I think about this one person. His name is Henry Brown, and when I learned about him, I found out more about his story, and I took 8 lessons from him. And the few things I learned from Henry Brown was that, y'all, first, he was a Virginian slave, right? He was a Virginian slave. Henry Brown, he arrived in Philadelphia March 30th, 1849, and when he did, he arrived as a free man, all right? The second thing is how he got his nickname, Box. Henry Box Brown shipped himself in a wooden crate that was 3 feet long and 2 feet wide, and it displayed the words dry goods and this side up along the box. The third thing I learned is that this side up is the best example of foreshadowing that I've ever heard about. The fourth thing I learned when Box Brown rose out of his crate that he had just spent 30 hours inside of, he called that moment resurrection. So I ask to let your truth see. What is within you that should rise? I mean, if you feel froggy, you leave. When was the last time you felt truly Phoenix, right? When was the last time you felt truly Phoenix? Because I can see that you're fire and you're fly. I wonder, what are the limitations of your hunger, the trench of your thirst, not for water, not for food, but for one's future? I have a query of questions for your internal tribe. 5. Marching has become this partial payment. The stakes of freedom take Kobe investments. Then sometimes we're fork and knife ready with no plates, no mats, no table. The sixth thing I learned is that our people, we find these moments of perseverance. And when we are being gambled in between distraction and destiny, destruction and divinity, the seventh thing I learned is that perfection is overrated. And it's really not worth more than a completed path. The eighth thing I learned is that Box Brown's hands, 27 bones in each, are the ones he was able to break free from his leash. And sometimes we're told too often to think outside the box, but there are times when our answers are inside of it. Dream packages are shipped by your own stamp of approval. So square up, dreams. We're already inside the ring, and it is up to us to be boxed in or to box ourselves out, because as you know, as foreshadowing boxing goes, it is always this side up.
Hi, I'm Juan Kemp, General Manager of Retail Operations for North America, and I'm honored to bring remarks on behalf of Shell for this 149th Juneteenth celebration. Major General Gordon Granger and 1,800 Union soldiers arrived in Galveston on the 19th of June, 1865, dispatching General Order No. 3. This declared 250,000 still enslaved people in Texas free, some 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. More than 200,000 in an effort to end slavery enlisted in the military. General Granger's Declaration of Freedom was the first step in granting former slaves choices previously denied, like worship, education, gathering of lost family. Those who acted in these choices were often terrorized, which makes the story of Juneteenth even more remarkable. In her epic book, The Warmth of the Other Suns, Isabel Wilkerson wrote about the great migration of Black Southerners to cities north, east, and west following the Reconstruction. As Texans moved, they carried Juneteenth with them, strengthening these traditions in search of a better life. Over the decades, Juneteenth has evolved into more than remembering injustices. It's a time to celebrate freedom, to build upon the efforts of those that came before us, and recommit to the work that remains undone. Since the unrest sparked by the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery by police, protests extended to workplaces, classrooms, state legislatures, and our nation's capital, changing our nation's conversation about race, injustice, and equality. At Shell, we harnessed this energy to bring people together, and we started working on improving our culture to create a better future for Shell. Leaders across Shell took action to create a more equitable and fair experience, embarking on a diversity, equality, and inclusion plan to ensure diverse people and ideas are valued, honored, and respected. This is an actionable plan that leverages Shell's employee resource groups to gain insights and learn more from their experiences. This commitment is also demonstrated through our strong partnership with external organizations who align with our efforts to build equality and lift diverse communities, like the National Urban League, supporting minority entrepreneurship, Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, whose commitment to equality and nonviolence helped overturn centuries of racial segregation in the United States. River Road African American Museum, supporting history and culture of African Americans in the rural communities of South Louisiana. The U.S. premiere of Mandela, Struggle for Freedom, explores the heroic struggle, forgiveness, and compassion of Nelson Mandela, and its relevance to the issues of inequality and injustice today in his fight to abolish apartheid. In the next hour, I hope you enjoy a robust dialogue with two Shell professionals who proudly represent the progress of those that forged a path of perseverance. Ryan Moody and Tremont Baston, Shell modern-day explorers. They represent the best of society and Shell to guide us through energy transition. Juneteenth, it's not just Black culture, but American culture. Enjoy this day of independence.
Geology underpins all oil and gas production in the deepwater Gulf of Mexico. Harnessing knowledge of rocks in the subsurface, geologic fundamentals are used to predict where oil and gas accumulations lie deep under the seafloor. Engineers determine how to safely drill wells and bring the fluid to the surface. As Shell begins to transition to more clean sources of energy and net zero carbon emissions by 2050, deepwater exploration and production will continue to deliver the energy of today while funding the energy of tomorrow, driving Shell and society's transition towards a cleaner, sustainable future.
The world's energy system is changing, and Shell is changing with it. Hydrogen has a critical role to play in providing necessary energy while lowering harmful emissions, helping us to fulfill our ambition to become a net zero emissions energy business by 2050 or sooner. In doing so, Shell is the only major energy company utilizing hydrogen in transport and is the first one building truck stops for hydrogen-powered trucks in the U.S. Whether a car or a truck, these zero-emission vehicles don't have greenhouse gases coming out of their tailpipes, only water.
Hello again. I want to take a moment just at the outset to thank Juan Kemp for those wonderful words to kick us off. Juan, thanks for reminding us exactly what Juneteenth is all about, and that's standing on the shoulders of our amazing and resilient ancestors, acknowledging their sacrifices, and racing forward to what we at least hope will be a brighter future. I'm at least proud of the contributions of Shell Oil Company and the communities in which we operate, but I just want to say this publicly. Juan, we're also proud of your leadership inside of our company and out in the community as well, so thanks again. Now, you just saw a video about Shell Hydrogen and Shell exploration and production, and I am really thrilled because now it's time to meet the innovators behind those voices. And today I'm joined by Ryan Moody. Ryan is an operations manager and engineer for Shell Hydrogen in Southern California. How's it going, Ryan?
It's going well. Excited to talk to you today.
Good to hear. I'm excited as well. We're also joined by Tremont Baston. He's a production geologist for Shell Oil Company, and he supports oil and gas development in the deep water Gulf of Mexico. Happy Friday, Tremont.
Hey, my favorite day of the week, Trevors. How you doing?
That makes two of us. I'm doing well, and thanks for asking. So kind of thinking about Juneteenth, I can't gloss over the fact that I'm the great-grandson of sharecroppers from Mississippi, right? And I'm the great-great-grandson of slaves who worked on plantations very close, actually, to the River Road African American Museum in Donaldsonville that Juan mentioned a few minutes ago. I grew up in New Orleans, but my parents and their village somehow got me all the way to Yale Law School, and now I'm proud to be working in the Shell Legal Department in Houston. But I'm curious about your respective journeys. And Ryan, I'll begin with you. Can you tell me a little bit more about where you grew up, where you went to school, and how you landed at Shell?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a native of Cincinnati, Ohio, and I was raised by Black parents who advocated for their children strongly. Well, I can't really remember when I started to like math and science and then therefore became an engineer a little bit later on. In sixth grade, I do remember that I transferred from one school to another, and I had been placed in this advanced math class. But they told my family that I would probably struggle to keep up, and that I might not be able to sort of move it as quickly as a pace of the other students. And I remember that my parents went in the office and said, not only has she never struggled academically, but she won't struggle here as well, and I want her to be in double advanced class. So learning it 2 grades ahead. And really, after that, I really feel like I took off, and I loved math and science. And so I later went on to University of Michigan and got my undergraduate and master's degrees in chemical engineering. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to meet with some Shell employees through the career fair. And so I was actually recruited by some Shell Black Networking Group, or SB&G members, though I didn't realize it at the time. All I knew was that I wanted to be able to see myself in the leadership of a company. And I kind of internally felt that at career fair, if there weren't Black faces that I saw at recruiting tables, that there probably weren't that many in the company as well. And so I was recruited by SB&G, had 3 internships at Shell, and then I've had a really great career here thus far.
Wonderful journey. Tremont, what about you? What's your story?
Yeah, so my story actually isn't drastically different from Ryan. So I've kind of always been, enamored by math and science. So as a kid, my habits were probably a little bit more destructive, just trying to tear things apart and figure out how they work. But my parents had me enrolled in all kinds of STEM activities, pretty much my whole kindergarten up until 12th grade year. But the moment that kind of really set me on the trajectory that I've taken so far actually came in the 7th grade, when one of my math teachers handed me a flyer for a program at Fort Valley State University, where I had the opportunity to spend about a week or 2 each summer between the 8th grade and 12th grade years to learn about different areas within STEM fields. This program actually had a focus on increasing women and minority participation within the energy industry. So funny enough, I've actually been involved with representatives from Shell since I was about 16 years old. So I ended up actually getting a full dual degree scholarship to attend Fort Valley State University, which is a small HBCU about an hour and a half south of Atlanta, and earned a degree in mathematics before transferring to Penn State University, where I earned a second bachelor's in geoscience as well as my master's in geosciences. So in the summers of my education, I had the opportunity to intern at a wide variety of oil and gas companies. And eventually I ended up with a full-time offer at Shell, which I decided to accept in order to kind of take advantage of all of the developmental opportunities as an early career geoscientist, and as well to have opportunities to eventually work around the world one day.
Very cool. Now, before we started talking about having this discussion today, I had not had an opportunity to meet either of you. And I think that's a good thing for y'all, because if you end up talking to the bankruptcy attorney, that means that something's gone wrong, right? And usually people run the other way when they see my name on an email. In any event, the theme today is powering progress together. So I'm curious, have you all worked together, or has your work kind of intersected since you've been at Shell?
Yeah, we've actually had a few different connections. So we met when we were first interning at Shell. So he and I were both interning in Houston, and I don't know about anybody else on the call, but when I joined a company to intern, and I've interned at Shell and a couple other companies as well, but I often sought out the Black or people of color interns because I wanted some people who had experiences like me. And so Tremont was one of those, and we became friends sort of starting there. Tremont, I'll let you talk about how we kind of know each other since we started working full time.
Yeah, so things come full circle all the time. And I don't know, I think it was like a random Tuesday or something, and I was walking around the office. So I actually worked in New Orleans before I moved over to Houston this year. But I think I ran into Ryan in the elevator, and I'm like, wait, what are you doing here? So she actually ended up working on another platform that is kind of in the same area as where I work. So we were kind of working on the same team at one point.
Wonderful, great story of togetherness, and I'm glad that you all have had an opportunity to work together, and it's my pleasure to meet you and have this discussion today. But I realize that it hasn't been easy along the way to get to where you are. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the sacrifices that you've made along the way and some of the skills that you've had to develop and learn? And Tremont, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Going into STEM fields can be quite difficult, and it definitely requires a high degree of discipline, determination, and steadfastness to kind of make it through all of the challenges that exist along the way in earning a STEM degree. So I think one of the biggest things that has been really impactful for me along the way is just the kind of realization that things that may have worked previously for you might not always help you to be as successful as you need to be in the future. So elementary, middle, high school, I was always like on a roll, got really good grades, was really, recognized by leadership within schools. And so I had these habits that I had formed that helped me to get to the point that I was at, going into college. But once I reached college, it was like a totally different ballgame. And the studying habits and the determination and grit that I needed to get through high school was not enough to kind of propel me to what I knew I needed to do and help me to get where I wanted to get through college. So kind of taking a step back and I guess kind of reanalyzing and taking a look in the mirror to really understand who you are and what drives you forward was a big challenge. But of course, eventually those are things that you work through and you figure out how to navigate those challenges moving forward.
Was there any pressure, just to follow up, Tremont, any pressure associated with that and the changing circumstances?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest pressure that I felt as a first generation college student is one, being that, I've always kind of been the poster child, I don't want to say it, but the poster child of the family, and knowing that, I have kind of the weight of those who've come before me and as well as the weight of those who are following in my path to go out and be as successful as I can be. Sometimes that can be a heavy burden to wear. But ultimately, I think it's really important for us as leaders in our respective areas to definitely think about that and think about the example that you're setting so that the folks that are coming after you have the opportunity to believe that they can achieve just as much as you have.
I definitely understand that dynamic, and I want to thank you for your candor in that response. Turning to you, Ryan, sacrifices that you might have made along the way or skills that you've had to develop.
Yeah, I would say in terms of skills that I've had to develop, and I know Tremont and I have talked about this before, but honestly, the resilience and the internal, ability to overcome when you are often the only one. We talked about how many Black geologists he knows. I've talked about how many Black people that I know in the renewables and energy solutions group, and it's not that many. And so sometimes it might sound silly, but I mean, struggling to be able to see yourself as a VP or a leader or something like that in a group where you just don't necessarily see people like you have done it before, I think that's definitely been a challenge. I would say something else that's not specifically identity related, but working in the energy industry, that's something that is absolutely essential. I think sometimes that will pull you to be available at times that you otherwise might not want to be. So I'm an operations manager and my family came here to visit for the first time in a year and a half. I got to hug them, which was awesome, but my station happened to go down. And so I packed the family in the car, we drove to the station, and then I triple shot. And while it's exciting to be a part of an essential industry, and certainly one that feels directly tied to the energy transition, the pull on your time when you might be going through something yourself. So the people who had to get gas back to people during Harvey, or I was in the winter storm in Houston while that was going on, and the people who were trying to work to restore power, there is pressure, right, in working in an essential industry where people really depend on the work that you do.
Absolutely. I feel it too. And I've spent many long nights and overnight sessions working on briefs overnight, but not as important as the work that you all are out there doing. But I do have a challenge for you. I'm going to lay my cards out on the table. I actually think that I have the most interesting job at Shell because I get to do some pretty cool stuff in the courtroom, but I also get to be a part of some exciting deals that we have going on. But here's your chance to convince me. What's the most interesting thing about the work that you do? And we'll start with you, Ryan.
Yeah, so I would say two things. I know you gave me one, but I'm gonna slide in a second one there. So first one really quickly is just feeling like I'm making a direct contribution to the energy transition. In my prior roles, I did make a contribution because a lot of the cash that I was able to help generate did fund a lot of the projects that I'm working on now, but really being able to help people drive cars that out of their tailpipes only comes water. There's no CO2, there's no nasty particulates, nothing like that, especially in an area that's as polluted as the one that I live and work in now and down in Los Angeles. That's really meaningful to me. And the second one is that being in Shell Hydrogen, it's a growing business and it's a new business for Shell. And so there's not a lot of things that exist here that did in the deep water space, which is where I started. And so I'm developing the marketing marketing plan for Shell Hydrogen and for my stations. And I am now responsible for the HSC statistics and the activity that goes on at my sites. And I'm developing the business plan and putting it into OP and doing all of these things that I hadn't been able to do before, hadn't had the opportunity to be exposed to as directly, and certainly not in an accountable way in my prior roles, which are more direct engineering focused. So both of those are really exciting for me.
Okay, I'll let you get away with two, and I'll also let Tremont go next.
Cool. So actually, as I was kind of thinking through my answer as I sat over here, it actually sounds kind of ridiculous when I try to explain simply what we do and how we do it. So definitely the technology that I use as a geologist in the oil and gas industry is for sure the most kind of impressive part of the work that we do. So essentially, so from the video you saw, there was a boat out in the ocean dragging some things behind it, which are called streamers. And we use this to capture seismic data, which is essentially using sound waves to measure properties of the rocks 3,000 feet below the surface of the ocean, and using that data to identify drilling prospects where we think oil and gas might be accumulated, and then figuring out exactly how much oil and gas we think is there. So imagine using that data to drill a well 5 miles away from the point that you're standing, try to hit a target that's within about 200 feet by 200 feet. The technology is absolutely fascinating, and it's definitely a big part of why I even chose to go into geology.
First of all, Tremont, thanks for breaking it down so that someone like me, I could even understand what you're out there doing. Y'all are starting to convince me that the geologists and the engineers are doing some fun stuff and maybe having a little bit more fun than those of us in legal. But I'm sure that there are definitely some challenges that you face as well. So what's the most challenging aspect of your job?
So essentially everything that I do as a geologist is about synthesizing data and telling a story in order to make a business decision. And one of the first things that I've heard, even as a high school student interacting with folks in the industry, is that all of the easy oil and gas has been found. And, you know, coming into my 6th year of my career, I can definitely say that that is an accurate statement. So on an everyday basis, I'm looking through tons of data, building models, and trying to tell a clear and cohesive story that captures both the potential as well as the risks and uncertainties that we're facing as we, you know, look for new targets to drill oil and gas wells. So it's really important that you accurately communicate what those risks and uncertainties are to management so that they can make the best business decisions. So ensuring that we're thinking about everything that we know and even the things that we don't know, as well as the things that we don't know, the unknown unknowns, as we like to call them. It's really important to get those points across. And that can definitely make some of the targets that we go after more difficult.
I get it. And Ryan, you, the most challenging aspect of your job?
Yeah, so I would say this aspect is both challenging and exciting, but because in a lot of ways it feels like what we're doing in the hydrogen space hasn't been done before, there's not a lot to sort of model the decisions that we make after. And so while we try to consult the best people who know and get as many experts in the room, it's all new and pioneering, which is both exciting, but also you kind of want to make the right decision. So like an example from my work is that we're building the first ever heavy duty hydrogen refueling station. So hydrogen powered trucks. First ones ever in North America. And so one of the decisions I have to make is how much do we sell it to people for? And I'm thinking, should we price it low so a lot more people want to get these hydrogen trucks and then make the environment better? Do we want to price it high so we can make a little bit more of a profit and thus have more money to be able to invest in these hydrogen trucks? Do we want to kind of sell things for a little bit of a premium in the way that you do for maybe organic vegetables or things like that? That's a little bit more expensive, but it also provides a premium product. And so because there's never been a hydrogen truck station in the US before, in any of North America, it's tough, but it's exciting to kind of work in this new area.
Good deal. And we've touched on this a little bit. You guys are steering me in the right direction because it looks like no matter where we turn, whether you're inside of Shell or another energy company, or you're just watching and reading the news, everything is about the energy transition that's lowering our carbon footprint. Can you tell me, Tremont, you in particular, about how your role is related to the energy transition? Can you help me to make that connection?
Sure. So, you know, a lot of people might think first thing that comes to mind with oil and gas production is, you know, this is what we're actually trying to get away from. So how does this actually even fit into the energy transition? So, you know, I think what is key to understand is that for some time we will still rely on oil and gas to power our vehicles, airplanes, to move things around the globe in order to, you know, create different products that we use on a daily basis. So fortunately for companies like Shell, oil and gas has kind of been our bread and butter for a while, so we're really good at what we do. And with that being said, we generate a lot of cash that can be used to fund some of these renewable energy sources like hydrogen and wind. But beyond that, and something that I'm really proud of and actually able to see firsthand, is that even within the oil and gas business, we're making strides to reduce our environmental footprint. So whether that's, you know, deploying a more efficient fleet of helicopters to get folks out to platforms offshore, or reducing gas flaring, things like that are happening today in our space, which makes oil and gas production a cleaner source of energy, so to speak, as well. And another thing that I've personally been involved with that I'm also really proud of is a lot of the work that Shell has done along the Louisiana coast for wetland restoration. So I've been out knee deep in mud planting, you know, greenery to, one, shore up the, you know, the beaches and to help prevent coastal restoration. But there are also other projects that go on similar to that, which are aiming at reducing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere.
I'm happy to hear all of that. And Ryan, I think the connection is pretty direct for me, but why don't you tell the people who are watching and listening to this about how your role is directly related to the energy transition as well?
Yeah, so currently what I'm working in is building out a mobility network, or hydrogen, that's used for the purposes of getting people from point A to point B. Now, I live and work in the Port of Long Beach, kind of Port of Los Angeles area. And so that area, because there's so many things coming into the port, there's lots of these diesel trucks that'll run from the port to an inland distribution center. And so that means that people who live in addresses and in zip codes, just like I do, are predominantly have higher cancer rates. They're predominantly lower income people of color. And so every single truck that we can convert over from something that's diesel and therefore emitting more harmful particulates and things like that into the atmosphere, everyone that we can convert over to a hydrogen-powered truck that is emitting only water out of the tailpipe certainly goes a long way to reducing the pollution that comes out of them and also improving the lives of the people who happen to live in these areas. And so that's a pretty direct tie. I would say something that's kind of a link between maybe what Tremont works on and also I work on is that the CCUS, or carbon capture, utilization, and storage groups. So in the production of hydrogen, if you make it with a fossil fuel, which sometimes people do, it'll generate CO2. And so if we're trying to capture and store that underground, we need people just like Tremont who love rocks, know how to put it into a formation, know how to make the CO2 not leak out of that formation, and therefore be more environmentally friendly.
When you say get information, I immediately think of Beyonce.
Beyonce, absolutely.
But I'll let you get away with that.
Love it. I love it.
When I think about the new processes, though, and the technologies and the ventures that will help to bring this from whiteboard to reality to make this all happen, it's really exciting to me. But what makes you most excited, Tremont, about the energy transition?
You know what? After your comment, I'm really excited to get Beyonce on some kind of marketing or promotional materials, talking about injecting some CO2 back into the earth. But for me, it's and I've always felt this way. But the prospect of having a cleaner, greener future for those who are coming after me has always been something that's really important. And after having my daughter last year, it hits just a little bit harder, right? Because I know she'll be around long after I'm gone. And I want her to be able to live on a planet where things are handled in a more sustainable and greener way so that she can enjoy the environment around her. And the other part of it for me is actually now feeling like companies and governments are actually serious about the energy transition and are essentially putting their money where their mouth is. So we're seeing a lot more investment in the green energy spaces. And you've seen even recently, a lot of governments have, implemented more strict regulations in terms of how much CO2 is being emitted, as well as how much companies are investing towards removing carbon from the atmosphere. So I am quite optimistic about what the future looks like within the energy transition.
Great. Ryan, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say for me, it is absolutely the social justice piece and making the energy transition and lower carbon fuels accessible for all people. So I happen to live in a decently polluted area, but I did make that choice. There are a lot of my neighbors who look just like me, who didn't have the same opportunities as me, who have no choice but to live in an area that is not conducive to their health. And I drive a hydrogen-powered car, but the fuel currently is pretty expensive because a lot of people are pioneering in this. It's not as ubiquitous as gasoline. And so the opportunity to bring fuels that are less expensive and, you know, plastics that are less carbon emitting and things like that to lower income people to make it truly accessible for everybody. And that social justice angle is absolutely why I'm so excited for this.
Very cool. Now, as you both know, Juneteenth is about looking back and acknowledging our rich histories and the sacrifices made by our ancestors, but it's also about thinking about how far we've come and what lies ahead. So I'm curious about what exciting innovations you all are working on today that, say, we'll be talking about 10 to 15 years from now. And listen, as your lawyer, don't give away all our secrets, right? Just give them a little taste. So what are we going to be talking about in 10 to 15 years, Ryan?
So I would say in the hydrogen space, it would be switching the colors of hydrogen. So in case you're not aware, gray hydrogen is made from a fossil fuel, and then the CO2 that's produced, you just emit it into the atmosphere. Blue hydrogen is that same process, but you capture and store that CO2, so no more is emitted into the environment. And then green hydrogen is the sort of ideal version where you make it from water. So you take a molecule of H2O, you use electricity and split it into your hydrogen that you want to use for fuel or some other purpose. And then you split it into oxygen, which you just emit into the atmosphere because it's good for people. And so you make it from water, and then when it's used inside a fuel cell vehicle or some other process, it recreates that water and it lets that water go. And so the electricity that you use has to be wind or solar or some other green force, right? And so what we're seeing in the industry is a lot of this gray hydrogen that is still just as polluting. Is kind of transitioning out, and people are focusing much more on the blue and the green. And so absolutely, Shell is kind of leaning towards that as well. So I know that in California, for example, we sell 100% renewable hydrogen at all of our stations, which is really great. So that blue hydrogen, but we're really looking forward to moving more towards that green pathway.
Did not know anything about the different colors of hydrogen, and I see you representing all of the colors in your background.
Indeed, I am.
Great, by the way. Tremont, what are we going to be talking about 10 to 15 years from now in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so geology's not going anywhere. The Earth has been around for billions of years. So fortunately, there are some kind of tangential things that happen in the geological sciences area that are applicable to future sources of energy, as well as what Ryan spoke about a little bit earlier with carbon capture and sequestration. So the same fundamental geologic principles that we use to explore for oil and gas are being used to identify locations where carbon can be safely stored underground. On the more renewable part, though, you'll probably start to hear a lot more about geothermal, wind, solar, things like that. And geothermal is essentially harnessing heat from the earth in order to create steam and drive turbines to create electricity. It's one of the cleanest forms of energy that there is out there. So identifying places where geothermal sources are present and can, be used to produce energy is a really big implication for geosciences, as well as if you even think about offshore wind farms. So there's some geotechnical issues that have to be considered in terms of where you can actually place these wind farms offshore. What does the bottom of the ocean surface look like there, and how can we safely ensure that these things maintain a stable presence where they're developed. So I'm really excited about the future of geology in the energy transition space as well.
Very exciting, but turned into something far less exciting. I turned 40 this year. I made it. But I was devastated when I learned that I no longer qualified for young lawyer organizations. But you both are very much young professionals. And I know that there are either lots of young professionals watching right now, or they'll watch this later when they get a chance, and they also want to get involved in the energy transition. So what advice do you have for them? And for this one, Ryan, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. And as Tremont and I, as people who have led the Shell New Professionals Network, let us tell you, you are always welcome, Travis. But so I would encourage people who are interested in getting involved to truly just jump in. You are pretty good at whatever area you're passionate about. So whether it's marketing, whether it's video production, there's a space for you in the energy transition. And so figuring out how to apply that skill set, everybody does not have to be an engineer. And frankly, if we were all engineers, the world would be less rich and less diverse, and it wouldn't be functioning the way that we love. And so I would encourage people to sort of jump in wherever they can and continue pushing. I think all of the pushing, even though sometimes we might disagree about the pace of the energy transition or the method of the energy transition, that people's challenging does spark a conversation. And as we have more conversations about it, more people get to know about it. And then maybe one day we can get Beyonce to talk about the CCUS stuff. Come on.
Trevon, advice for young professionals.
Yeah, I think Ryan hit the nail on the head there. Just to add on a little bit to what she said, and actually these are probably some of your words from some conversations that we've had earlier, but figuring out where your passion lies and then just trying to understand how you can integrate that into the energy transition. So whether you want to be a technical contributor, whether you want to be more on the business side of things, or whether you're really interested in politics and advocacy, I think there are a ton of avenues that you can go down in order to kind of enter that energy transition space. If I had to give one piece of advice for skills that I think will be absolutely crucial in this area, is the ability to think and talk across lines. So being able to understand what the technical implications are for the energy transition, as well as kind of more of the social justice or economic implications, and being able to, speak the languages across the different parts of what could be business or government, and clearly articulating why what you do matters and how it helps benefit society will be a really, really good skill to have.
Great. Since you all are sharing so openly about your passions, now's the time when I get to get all in your business. Now, I know it's not about rocks and hydrogen 24/7. So tell me something about your hobbies and what you like to do for fun outside of Shell. Tremont?
Sure. So I wouldn't be a geologist if I didn't like spending time outdoors. So hiking is a really big hobby of mine. My wife and daughter, we love to travel. Of course, with COVID, we haven't been able to get out and about too much. So recently, we've just been spending a lot of time with each other, and building our relationships a little bit deeper. But I'm a huge football fan, diehard Falcons fan. So it was very interesting living in New Orleans for 6 years, where everybody there bleeds black and gold. And I also have picked up a new hobby of cycling. So we got a Peloton kind of at the beginning of the pandemic. And actually just last weekend, I went to Chicago for Memorial Day, and I was able to get in about 15 miles up and down Lake Michigan. So that was really nice. I also play a lot of Call of Duty.
You're gonna definitely have to send me your username for the cycling so that we could. It's always a competition with me.
Yep.
So, Ryan, what about you? What do you do outside of work?
Yeah, I would say similar to Tremond, lots of outdoor hobbies. In the pre-COVID times, I used to do story slams. So if you ever listened to The Moth on NPR or something like that, I used to tell stories about my life and things that were going on, which was interesting. I follow Tremond's baby on Instagram, so I see what's up with their family and what she's doing and developing. And I will share a little bit of Tremond's business here, but both he and I like trash reality TV. And so sometimes we'll talk about what's coming up on the latest season of something or who did what. So going to keep it real and tell you both of our deep, dark secrets, if you will.
Who knew that the engineers and geologists also watch trash TV? So it makes it okay for me to watch a few episodes too. Thank you both. I know that we're going into the weekend, so I hope that you all both get to do some hiking, some cycling, lots of time outdoors, and of course a little bit of trash TV. I want to thank both of you for spending time with me this afternoon and for being leaders inside of Shell and also in your respective communities. I also want to thank the audience for joining us today, and I want to encourage each and every one of you to really engage with what I consider our Juneteenth holiday. I know that Emancipation Park and Shell have a great lineup for you, and last but not least, to learn more about how Shell is powering progress, please visit us at www.shell.com.